First off, thank you everybody for joining us. This is the 52nd series of the Martin Center Research Seminars. 52nd series indicating that we've been conducting these for 52 years. So working on a legacy here. Hosted by the Department of Architecture at the University of Cambridge. My name is Michael Salka. I'm one of the conveners along with a small team of other students here. And our theme for this particular series is living building, which is perfectly appropriate for Stefano's portfolio, as I'm sure you'll see. I'll make a brief introduction, but of course you'll get to know Mr. Boeri's work as we proceed. So for those who are not yet familiar, Stefano Boeri, architect and urban planner, is full professor at Politecnico di Milano. In Shanghai, he is director of the Future City Lab at Tongji University, a post-doctoral research program which explores the future of contemporary metropolis under the perspectives of biodiversity and urban forestry. Stefano Boeri's work ranges from the design of architecture and urban visions to product design, with a constant focus on the geopolitical and environmental implications of urban phenomena. The attention to the relationship between nature and the city leads in 2014 to the realization of Bosco Verticale in Milan, the first prototype of residential building hosting 800 trees and 20,000 plants, which has become an international model for green architecture. Stefano is among the main players in the debate on climate change in the field of international architecture. In November 2018, he was named co-chair of the Scientific Committee for the first World Forum on Urban Forests and organized together with the FAO in Mantua. This forum was organized. In 2019, he presented the Great Green Wall of Cities, Green Urban Oases project, developed also with the FAO, as well as C40, UN Habitat, and other international resource organizations on the occasion of the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019. From 2011 to 2013, he was Councilor for Culture at the Municipality in Milan. In 2018, he was appointed the President of the Triennale Milano. Since 2020, he is also president of the Scientific Committee of Forestami, which is a project aimed at planting 3 million trees in the metropolitan area of Milan by 2030, which is a lofty ambition. And I hope we'll see how we get there. On a personal note, it was my great honor and pleasure to collaborate with Stefano and his partners on the upcoming Green Book of Biocities promoted by the European Forest Institute, and especially because Stefano and his firm are among the elite who are really realizing these ideas in the built environment, as we're about to see. So that being said, Stefano, thank you again very much for joining us. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's such a pleasure to invite you, let's say, show more or less what we are doing, what we have done. And, you know, this title is also the result of research that we started basically 20 years ago. And we are going to publish a book which has this same title, and it's a way to, let's say, to gather all the contribution we received in the last year and decades about this, let's say, attempt to put together architecture and living nature, and to, let's say, to consider this new topic as something that it's become crucial from our architectural perspective. But basically, I'd love to start from 1980, because I cannot forget that one of the most relevant, let's say, architectural historian and historian in the second half of the 19th century was François Choët. And François Choët in 1980 was publishing a book called La Règle et le Modèle. Why this book is so important? Because what Choët was doing in that very moment was to, let's say, to underline the relation between two families of let's say, approach to architecture and urban design that were developed centuries. And what François Choët was saying that there is one family who was very important, who has its probably origin in Leon Battista Alberti, who was more related with the idea of make the architectural project and architectural design as a result of a system of rules. And the second family was related to Thomas More and his utopia, and was on the opposite, the idea that any kind of proposal that aims to transform the public realm, let's say our city, has to be the result of a vision, of a model, of something that has to become like a one unique configuration of a possible future. So what François was saying is that in a certain way, let's say all the theories that were developed in our disciplines were more or less related with these two main alternatives. One is to, let's say, perform transformation starting from a system of rules, and the other one is forming transformation but starting from a model. And from a certain point of view, what François was saying is that all the model movement or the rationalist movement was like a second kind of consequence of this second evolutionary system, with the exception of Cerdà. Cerdà was usually quoted by her as an example of someone who has tried to put together the two approaches. The one related with a system of rules that can be reinterpreted and variated in the practice of design and urban design, and the other who was at the same time starting from the system of, let's say, unique configuration, more about the modelization of the future. Why I started that? Because I think that what's happened in those years in Europe was very important, because there was another koine, another, let's say, way to approach urban transformation, who more related with structuralism. So this very important thought in the sphere of, let's say, sociology, philosophy, anthropology, that was basically in French, but was extremely influential over the world, who were trying to, let's say, observe the surface of the world in order to detect the invisible structures, the invisible processes that were, let's say, really, let's say, creating the transformation. And part of this attempt to translate structuralism and its into urban discipline was developed in Italy, and thanks to a system of Italian thinkers and architects like Carlo Monino, Vittorio Gregotti, and Aldo Rossi. And I wrote a book on that because I thought that that's, let's say, moment where we had different approach to urban transformation, but different theories of urban transformation in Europe was very important. Another very important experience was the one developed by all the radical movement, and this is not simply by Archigram, but also by group of Italian architects based in Florence. And another one that you, I think, know very well, it's the way to, let's say, start to understand how to describe the social and urban transformation, trying to, let's say, prefer to have a gaze which has to become capable to oscillate between space and society. And from that point of view, I think that the experience of Giancarlo De Carlo in Italy, but Smith, Robert and Son, and what he could do with the Team 10 was extremely relevant. All this was probably preparing solo between the 20th and 21st century, with the fact that at a certain moment our discipline started to, let's say, observe what was really happening all around us. And basically what really was happening was an explosion of the urban phenomenon. More or less, I think that exactly one of the, let's say, of the best representation of this new awareness about the dimension of city was developed by Rem Koolhaas in the 2000, thanks to this book, and the exhibition was developed in Bordeaux. You know that REM is now really radically changing the perspective, and it's a way to observe the world, as he was doing 2 years ago at Guggenheim with this idea of countryside. But at that very moment, at the center of his station was the fact that the urban condition was, let's say, exploding over the war. He was, let's say, studying, let's say, the amazing growth of the South Asiatic megalopolis and those Latin American, African metropolis. But basically, mutation was exactly a way to, let's try to put at the center of our attention this process and this very important phenomena. And what we have done with our research group Multiplicity in the same period, together with mutation, together with OMA and its network, research network, was to develop an idea also of how Europe was changing cities, how European cities were changing, and creating something which is now very similar to one unique urban configuration, Europe. At the same time, I think that a new awareness started to be present in our perspective on urban transformation, and was connected with the idea of sustainability. Sustainability, as you know, was very important at the beginning of this millennium, and it becomes to be also, let's say, object of studies and observation also in our universities. And I remember when I was teaching at Harvard University, GSD, I was trying to, let's say, to see how it's possible to develop a critical perspective on sustainability. And at that very time, for me, it was very important to open a dialogue with three thinkers. One is Jeremy Rifkin, and Jeremy, since 10-20 years, started to develop his idea of a third industrial revolution, his idea of how to make building and cities capable to become sustainable through reuse of technology, through reuse of mechanical devices capable to absorb the energy from the sun, from the wind, and so on. At the same time, a second, for me, very important reference was Andrea Branzi, and basically was Andrea Branzi in the 1997, 1996, with this concept of agronica. Agronica was the idea to, let's say, stress and develop a concept of agriculture who has to, let's say, extend its presence, englobing also the urban environments. And the third thinker who was not for very important was Gilles Clément. Gilles Clément probably was also one of the first thinkers that started to propose this concept of third landscape, or of a landscape that is not simply an extension of urban environment, considering the presence of green landscape, but it's the fact that nature, living nature, wild nature, could come back and, let's say, become a protagonist of the future of our landscapes. So in that very moment, at the Biennale of Dani, we were presenting an installation who was quite successful, where we were trying, using Jeremy Rifkin's, Andrea Branzi, and Gilles Clément concept, try to criticize the concept of sustainability, showing also the possible dystopic consequences of let's say, of the analysis of the concept of sustainability. So we are showing how, for example, a city who is completely abandoned to the other living species could become a nightmare, but at the same time also the same nightmare could be solved if we use open a public space only for the agriculture activities, or to make our city only technological. This was, let's say, was why we were trying to, let's say, let's say, not to abandon the concept of sustainability, but to little bit criticize it. And I think that what's happened in the last years, but has also passed in the part of the literature and contribution that we came in from the 90s, 80s, was a fact that probably we have observed also with the pandemic, that this attempt to criticize the concept of sustainability, which was a concept from the beginning that had the clear idea to, let's say, create a distance between the human sphere and the natural sphere, to create a gap between what we are, between what we feel, and what is natural outside us. Sustainability was a strategy, and is still a strategy, that aims to reduce the impact of the human sphere on nature. Well, I think that what's happened with the pandemic, what's happened with COVID-19, is exactly the fact that we have understood that we cannot continue to keep this distance, to defend this gap, to try to let's say conceptualize nature as something which is outside our body, outside our building, outside our city, and be aware, accept the condition that nature is part of us, and nothing more than a microorganism, as showed how was happening. At the same time, this different idea of relation among the nature and human sphere was also in a way confirmed by the awareness that probably one of the reasons of let's say of the contagious of COVID-19 was also related with the spillover virus realized created by process of deforestation. So when we reduce the biodiversity of an environment, we facilitate the jump that the virus could do from one to another living species. And at the same time, also what we have seen in our cities and many other cities all over the world in the period of the lockdown is also, let's say, mirroring the fact that probably a very old deal between us and other living species was broken, and that we have really to reconfigure our relation with living nature. So that was one of the reasons that in 2000.
Stefano, I'm sorry to interrupt if you're still speaking, but we have just lost your audio connection. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Try again.
Do you hear me?
Okay, we hear you now.
Sorry.
No problem.
Okay.
We just lost about 30 seconds.
Okay. Just go back.
Yes, just here. The slide with the monkeys.
Okay, sorry. No, but okay, we can go ahead. I was just saying that in 2014, 15, 16, with my students in Milano and also in Tongji University, we started to work with the idea to study a city not simply as an environment for us, but as a complex environment for many other living species. And this project, it's called Animal City, was very inspirational and very important for all of us, and was also a way to go back to what Andrea Branzi was telling many years before that. And the result of this work was a different, let's say, several different proposals that try to conceive biodiversity, not simply as a way to, let's say, define the richness of an environment in terms of living species presences, but also as a way to drastically change the point of view, trying to acquire the point of view of the other living species on our habitats. And that idea of biodiversity was for us extremely important and extremely influential. So just to come back to what we do, not as researchers, but more as designer. And you know well that this oscillation between design and research, it's very important in our profession, because I think it's an open question, it's an open issue. So it's not so easy to define this relation. And I believe that it's not right to let's say solve this question putting research as a first step and design as a second step, or on the opposite, putting design as a way to test the context in order to analyze better. I believe that design and research are two different approaches. Design is a way to, let's say, define one step by step to arrive to define one unique formal configuration of an object, of a building, of a part of a city. Research, on the opposite, is a continuous movement toward the possibility to open the future, to gather ideas, gather thoughts, gather solutions, gather possible configuration. So one is inclusive and the other is exclusive and selective. But I think that what we can do is to simply to accept this schizophrenic cohabitation inside us and do our best to facilitate the possible synapses that we could receive from sudden context between the research sphere and the design sphere. And when we talk on design sphere, these are some part of the books. Well, I think what is important also to start to show how was the beginning of many of our proposals, who was something that were directly coming from what I showed until now, was a consideration of how the urban conditions changed in the last 50 years. And you know well that if we could concentrate all what is city in one part, one part of the planet, we will not probably cover more than the 3–4% of the surface of the emergent land. So this urban Pangea, as you know, it's growing and is growing in a different part, many different parts of the planet. But what makes this, let's say, explosion of Pangea important is that first, 1/3 of this urban Pangea is habited by slums, favelas, and let's say informal settlement. And what is, from a certain point of view, extremely important to consider is that this urban Pangea is consuming 70% of the natural resource of the planet and producing the 75% of the CO2 emission. In other words, what is at the origin of global warming. On the other side, if we could do the same with forest and woodlands, well, we will not cover more than the 30%, with, as you know, basically something around 3.2 trillions of trees. But this 30% is crucial for the future of our species, because it's, let's say, one of the way we have to absorb CO2. And this is very important from a certain consideration, because if it is true that we have in our hands, thanks to what we have studied in the recent past, several ways to avoid to produce CO2, like using renewable energies, solar panels, and so on. At the moment, we have only plants, we have only trees. If we want to absorb CO2 that we have already produced. And basically knowing that our cities that are producing 70% of global CO2, the real challenge of the future is how we can imagine that cities should and could become the protagonist of a very important thing to reverse climate change. So not simply being the origin, not simply being the first victim of that, but the protagonist of a drastic change. And so all what we have done, we are doing with our study in Milan, our study in Shanghai, and what we do in many parts of the world about urban forestry, forestation, it's strongly related with this sequence of consideration. So probably the vertical forest concept was very important for us, and also probably the most successful and really because of what we had done. It came from several important inspirations. Just to give you just some point, one was for sure Frederick Untertwasser, who was an architect / artist based in Vienna, who was very important in the 70s and the 80s, and he was started to let's say to propose an idea that architecture should conceive plans as tenants of the building. And he was also building in Vienna 2 or 3 houses where we're putting the roots of the trees inside on the internal roofs of the apartment. But the other amazing inspiration was Joseph Boyd. Joseph Boyd in 1982 was present in Documenta Castle, and you know he was gathering 7,000 basalt stone, and at the same time selling one by one. He was buying 7,000 oak trees and started to plant 7,000 oak trees. And this kind of metamorphosis between the mineral sphere to the living nature, to live natural sphere, was and is an amazing reference model for all what we do and all what we could do in the future. But for sure, we have many other, let's say, experiences in the recent of architecture that was a way to use living nature in direct contact with building. But basically what we have done, I think if it has some, let's say, character and originality, it's not simply that we are developing this idea on the vertical dimension, but it's also that we have tried to avoid any kind of use of living nature as a decoration. So we are absolutely not interested to do a kind of, let's say, to propose a kind of ornamental creation of our building. And what we try to do on the opposite is to develop a combination of architecture and living nature as one of the most becoming component of that. And this is was the origin of also the idea of the vertical forest in Milano, and also the origin of many different systems that we are developing in the recent future. Well, you know well that I want to start to imagine and develop something of new. You have to take a risk of possible success, of possible mistakes and failures, and I think that the vertical forest Milano is there since 10 years. So we are now in condition to have used this case study as a fantastic reference for understanding how to go ahead, how to learn from the mistakes, and how to possible to study the possible to guide to improve this kind of prototype, knowing that the vertical forest itself is simply one of the tools we have to make our cities greener. It's not the first, it's not the most important, it's one of the different tools. But as I was saying, the real issue is about how we can imagine to demineralize our city and how to can implement biodiversity. So with vertical forest, we are doing this in many different parts of the world. Basically, it's interesting to consider that we start always with the consideration of the climate condition, then with the selection of plants, then with the design of the facade of the building that has always to consider the different evolutionary trajectories of every different species of plants. We are really conceiving our architecture as house for plants and trees, and not only for humans and birds. And that's why the composition, the design of our facade starts from, let's say, the selection of plants and from their needs, from the space they need. These are where we are now more or less partner, and this is an attempt to, let's say, a kind of atlas of what we have done in that field, a different scale in terms of, let's say, new relation between architecture and living nature. One of the most interesting, let's say, step forward we have done recently is this building in Eindhoven, Holland. Why we are very proud of this building is simple, because this building is a social housing building, and when we started to imagine this building, having experienced the Milano vertical forest and knowing also how was complicated to, let's say, with the cost of construction and maintenance, we were quite skeptical. But finally, thanks to the use of prefabrication, thanks also to a different way to conceive the maintenance of this building, I think the result it's so great, and this building is now inhabited. It has more than 120 apartments, and what makes this building really great is the fact that the cost of construction was not more than 1,300 euros per square meter, which is related with the construction cost in Milano was really geology. So that was one of, let's say, of the consequences of our attempt to improve the Bosco Verticale prototype in Milano, and in a certain way, is one of the most, I believe, successful attempt to do that. But this is not unique. We are now trying to develop the same kind of affordable model of a vertical forest in another part of the world. For instance, and this is the plans of the Eindhoven, very simple. So every apartment is with meter and could be assembled or not, but every apartment has 2 balconies and more than 2 trees, 8 shrubs, and 10 different plants. And you see how the program of the facades. And this is a nursery that we developed in Eindhoven. But when we design a vertical forest, as I told you, we start with the selection of plants, and so that means that we have the facade of our building present also before the construction start. In this botanic nurseries that are very important for us, that we use to check the future of our being. This is still Eindhoven vision. We have also developed this the same concept in China. In Hangguang, these are 2, let's say, affordable vertical forest tower we have recently built. But we are also present in Utrecht, where we are proposing a vertical forest, which is interesting because it's a multifunctional building with a commercial basement, office, center, and residential with 2 different residential at the top. We have finished to also build a different kind of architecture, of green architecture in Antwerp, where the idea was not to add green and plants to the facade, but to use the roofs as a common places. This is the Antwerp building was just finished. And the same concept we are now proposing in Milano, where we have imagined to propose a courtyard building, a building with a courtyard, which has but all the facades inside that are very green. And again, this is another project developed that we are developing with the competition we've done with Dealer Scofiglio in Milano that we have won, where the idea is to, let's say, have this series of green layers. And what makes this building, I believe, interesting is the fact that we are now trying to use wood and timbers also for the structure. And we have understood how much this could, in the future, drastically cut the production of CO2 during the construction process, which is one of the most important of our things. But just to consider that we are also involved in other parts of the world, in other climate conditions. This is the construction of three towers in Cairo, in the new Cairo, so in the desert environment, and the same we are doing in other part of the world. Another issue is about what to do with existing building, and this is, for instance, in Brussels, a project that we are developing that is to add a green facade to an existing office building. So to transform this office building in a residential building and retrofitting it and adding a structural autonomous green facade. And that's another very important issue that we have to consider. And the same we are doing in Prato in Tuscany, in Italy, where we are changing social housing complex and an office building, adding this new facade to existing building, which is very important. Second sphere is about urban forestry at a different scale. As I told you, we are being involved in many cities in trying to introduce forest and inside our urban environments to multiply the green surfaces. And this is the idea to, let's say, intervene, change or retrofitting a system of abandoned rayards into a system of garden and parks. And it's a vision for the future of Milano that we have developed. And this vision is still open. It's part of the future public policies adopted by the Milano Municipality. But basically what we are proposing here is really to bring back nature, not as a, let's say, design garden, but as really, let's say, wild nature with fields, with lake, with forest, and so on. And we know so well how much this could, let's say, give an amazing contribution to the future of our life in the city like Milano. And the same concept was developed 7 years ago in Tirana, which is the capital of Albania, where we were proposing this idea of, let's say, of a city, archipelago city, with this buffer of forest all around, with a system of green corridors that were crossing the entire city, with, as you know well, several amazing advantages in terms of absorption of CO2, reduction of the heating, and then again a capacity to absorb the dust of produced by urban pollution, and to increase and pursue the biodiversity itself. And this is one of the last projects that we have developed at the scale of an urban environment, and this is a proposal for the future of Genève, where we were trying to show that it was important to change the model of the city, not growing around the lake, but growing along the mountain, and putting together Genève with Annecy, with a system of small urban villages surrounded by a forest. But what makes this idea of a new metropolis for us extremely important is the fact that at the center of this urban ring, you don't have a square, you don't have a monument, you don't have a church, you don't have a mosque, you have a mountain with its amazing biodiversity. And this is an image developed by our partners, Bauku, where it shows the image, the vision that you could have from Salève Mountain, which is at the center of the Genève-Annecy new urban ring. Imagining this is a kind of new centrality. Just to go ahead and to the conclusion, I think it's another important step we have done is about the creation of new cities. There are parts of the world where we still need to imagine how new cities. Some part this is a direct result of the migration processes. For instance, this is what we have done in China. We are studying some alternative model of production of new cities that will be, for a certain point of view, one of the possible result of the process of migration from the countryside that you know well that are so strong in China. So basically, something around 40-50 millions of people are abandoning the countryside every year. And so instead of extending the suburban peripheral environments, our proposal is to create a system of middle-sized forest cities with different dimension but with a quite high density, but with buildings that are always covered by plants from the beginning. And this was the beginning, an idea of a proposal and of a project that we have so proposed for an exhibition. We are just opening in Shanghai about trees, where there is also part related to our work and our proposal of urban forestation. We'll get this model at the center, where we are showing how different possible models of forestation could be applied to different orographical and morphological contexts. And that was one of the ways that we are developing this kind of model. But probably the most relevant thing we are doing from this point of view is what we are proposing to do in Mexico, in southeast Mexico, nearby Cancun, where there is idea to build this research city for several research center and university for 130,000 people, and we are proposing to realize for a city with more than 7 million plants that has a buffer all around for agricultural field, but also for solar panels that can make the city self-sufficient. It's used water and to desalinize it using renewable energies, and this is something that we really going to do in the future. Last but not least, I want to conclude with some reference to another part of our work. I'm sure that you know well Tim Ingold, and he was so inspirational for all of us. And his idea that we have to move from the concept of network to the concept of meshwork was very important also for all what we do in terms of connection, of connectivity. This is Richard Weller idea of World Park. You know that Richard Weller was proposing this idea of connect the biodiversity hotspots that are present all over the world, and in that way to multiplicate the advantages that biodiversity could have on the future of our life. Well, you know also that one of the more, let's say, example of this attitude to connect and to create linear corridors is what's at the scale of the entire continent and planet is what is happening in Sub-Saharan Africa, where the country of Union Africa in 2007-8 started to, let's say, create agricultural landscape and forests. And now it's visible from the satellite, this series of, let's say, green environment used to stop the extension of the Sahara Desert. And in 2019, at United Nations Summit on Global Change, together with Kew Garden, together with FAO in Habitat, we were talking about how to make this concept of bioconnection of corridor of biodiversity. That's something that could be practically realizable in other parts of the world, not simply as a model, but as something that can be really developed. From that point of view, it's also part of what we are doing in Milano, where we are now proposing to plant 3 million of plants around the city. But the basic challenge is to make cities greener in order to make city not obstacle to the realization of this corridor biodiversity, but possible future hubs that can multiplicate this process of corridors. And this is something that we are doing with our students also now, that we are imagining to make Italy a case of creation of green and corridors that can cross the entire country from east to west and from north to south in order to make all this really possible. That's more or less what we are doing. I'd love to finish with this because I'm also, I think, as a president of the Triennale of Milano. Triennale Milano is a cultural institution, and every 3 years we organize an international exhibition, inviting countries and research centers from all over the world. And we have decided the title of the next one that will open in July. Next July is, as you've seen, Unknown Unknowns. unknown means in a way can be, let's say, what we don't know, we don't know. So in a kind of, let's say, way to accept that the dimension of what we don't know has enormously in the last months, and that we have to, let's say, explore new fields to explore the field. And this is a team of curators compared with Francis Queret and Silvia Vaudo, who's one of the director of European Space Agency in Paris. And Francis is an amazing architect coming from Burkina Faso, and he will develop a part of the exhibition on Africa. But basically, I want to conclude with that because I think that all what we have done, all what we have studied, has now to, let's say, is with question of let's say, unknowns. So to, let's say, accept to start again with exploration of a universe which is still for it not unknowns. So we know that we know to know the 5% of the universe. We know to know the 5% of the ocean. We know to know the 5% of function of the synapses. But the point is that we have lost the idea of what is the 100%. And basically, this is all. So thank you so much for your attention.